Hello, doers, builders, and shapers of tomorrow. You're all conductors of the world of work. Welcome to the Workestration podcast.
The Workestration podcast is an exploration into the evolving world of work, driven by the fundamental questions. Where is work going? How can we make it better? And how do we get there? We're your host, Stela Lupushor.
And Donnas, Scarola. And today we're going to be talking to Jeff Schwartz. Jeff is a global advisor, author, researcher, executive, and professor exploring the future of work, workforces, and workplaces. In short, a future of work adventurer and Sherpa. And as a VP at Gloat, leading the efforts to empower the exponential workforce through our work and workforce orchestration platform. Sharing stories as an author, he wrote Workforce Ecosystems and Work Disrupted. And he's teaching at the MBA in Executive Education at Columbia Business School. He's also a Thinkers 360 Top 50 thought leader on the future of work and ecosystems. Hi, Jeff. We're super excited to have you today. Well, let's dive into it. So, Jeff, our listeners already know a little bit about your bio, but you've written a book, co-authored another. You were the senior advisor in the future of work practice at Deloitte. You're an adjunct at Columbia, and you are the VP of Insights and Impact at Gloat. But most importantly, I would argue, because I saw you speak a few years ago, I would argue you've always had a really compelling perspective on the future of work and how work works. And so now with so much changing with AI taking center stage, would really love to hear your take, your advice to leaders, and what you think people have wrong about what's happening.
Well, it's great to be with you today, and it's really great to be on this podcast. I love the idea of workestration, as I've said. And when I reflect on where we are in 2026, I was on a call this morning with a very large global company, and they were asking me questions about what I thought should be the priorities for 2030. And I'll come back to that, Donna and Stella, because I think this goes to, in many ways, the main challenge we have in 2026 and in the next couple of years, which is we are in the middle of some very significant shifts, some very significant transformations. I think it's hard to argue against that or about that. Maybe some people will. And the theme of research and the teaching that I've been doing really since 2012 is captured in a quote from Albert Einstein. I often joke you can't go wrong when you quote brilliant people like Albert Einstein. And Einstein said, among many other quotable things, that you can't use an old map to explore a new world. And I think that this in some ways is the biggest challenge. I don't want to say it's the misstep that we're making, but I think perhaps one of the biggest challenges we have right now is to think about how we are framing the problems and the questions. And are we challenging and moving beyond old mindsets and old frames? I'll give a couple of examples of this as we're getting started. We like the idea of dichotomies, either or. It's either people or machines. It's employees or managers. It's employees or contractors, contingent labor, and different ecosystem models, which we can come to as well. And I think this is one of the big problems we have now. These are old maps. These are old ways of thinking about the problems. There's a brilliant writer and speaker, Rishad Tabakawala, who's written about this, and he has a wonderful expression, which is that the future does not fit in the containers of the past. I agree with him. That's why we need new maps for new ways of working. And I mentioned a minute ago, here we are in 2026, and I was talking with a senior corporate leader earlier today who said, well, can you help us think about 2030? So I thought about February 2022. Well, February 2022, we were all there. We were just coming out of the COVID moment. We all thought that we were going to be working in a hybrid model forever. In fact, most of the big companies said that that's what we were going to do. We've moved well beyond that. But again, February 2022, there was no ChatGPT. It was November 30th, the last day of November. They squeezed it in before the last month of 2022. So if you just wind the clock back to 4 years ago, AI wasn't actually on the corporate agenda, was on the back burner in many organizations, of course. But what have we seen in the last few years? I looked this up over the weekend. Since OpenAI released GPT-3 in November 30th, 2022, they have released 21 models. 2 of them are active. 6 of them are supported as legacy models. 13 of their models have been retired. We don't even use them anymore, okay? Again, this isn't 4 years ago. This is about 3.5 years ago in terms of where we've gone. So thinking about new maps for new worlds, past does not fit in the containers. The future doesn't fit in the containers of the past. Thinking about how quickly things are moving, I think this is in some ways, the biggest challenge that we have right now. And I'll just use one other example in terms of as we're getting started. We're having a debate, not a real debate, but a kind of debate in 2026 and 2025, 2027, which is the future AI first, or is the future human first? And, depending on to whom you're talking to in your organization and in industry and in tech firms, it's like, do we need an AI first strategy or do we need a human led strategy? Well, you can tell where I'm going. I don't think that we are in a world of, is it AI led or is it human led? It is a new combination of the two. And thinking about how people and technology work together, I think is absolutely central. I'll just mention one other sort of recent report that's come out. There was a wonderful report from our colleagues at the Burning Glass Institute, who did a report. I think it was called the binary challenge of AI. And their main observation in the report that I took away was that when they did analysis, and they do great analysis of work and jobs over the last few years and the few years leading up to the COVID period and the Gen AI event, that they saw a very strong relationship between jobs and work that were automated and augmented. Jobs where parts of the jobs are being replaced and other parts of the jobs and the work is being done is being augmented. So from one perspective, it's not about whether the machines are going to take our jobs. The machines are both going to change our jobs by taking certain pieces of it and making it easier for us to do that with AI agents and potentially robots, of course. And then other parts where we will be teaming with the AI agents to do work. Years ago, when I was at Deloitte Consulting, we called this super jobs and super teams. My good friend Josh Bersin calls it super workers, super managers. Exactly, they're the same concepts. But it's not, will we be replaced or augmented? It's actually both are happening at the same time. And so I think the ability to think about these different tensions in an integrated and an orchestrated way, that's part of workestration, is thinking about automation and augmentation and teams in new ways is really central. And that's not a lot of what's happening now. And we can go into this a little bit more. What's happened over the last couple of years, and we can talk in today's discussion about what does it mean that 2026 is the year of enterprise AI, because I think, at least from what I've heard in the first month of the year, there seems to be consensus, we can argue about it, that this is the year of enterprise AI. What does it mean that this is the year of enterprise AI? And how helpful will it be to actually think about these new frames and these new models and how that will really create some new opportunities for us going forward? So I'll use that as a way of getting started with today's discussion.
You landed in the perfect place for the next question, because I think last year it was the age or the year of the pilots. Everybody was experimenting, everybody was running pilots, testing different models, changing the tech stack, figuring out what that human machine collaboration and partnership looks like. And now the expectation is that it's time for prime time, in essence, and you see a lot of the solutions being deployed with the expected ROI, but at the same time, there's not as much effort put in place to reimagine what the next iteration of beyond binary, right? It's no longer just human and contractors, but it's also digital workers and agents and the orchestration layer. That manager now needs new skills to be able to reallocate. None of that is being defined well yet. We need to change the reward structures. We need to change the tech stack. We need to reimagine what the exchange of value looks like from employment nowadays. Because if you can get, as a consultant, work done in a quarter or less of a time, what do you do with the excess capacity? CFO is going to come very quickly after you to realize that efficiency gain. So we really need to fundamentally change how we design work and what is work even defined in organizations. Do you see any progress made in that realm? Do you see any success stories of how that is shaping up to be?
Wow, there's about 10 questions in there, Stella. I will try to answer a couple of them as you can direct me. We are pivoting from the last few years, which have been focused in most organizations, and for us as individuals, on getting an understanding of what AI can do, particularly what Gen AI can do, and now what AI agents can do. So we've been on a learning curve in the last few years. As individuals, by the way, we're generally very good as individuals figuring out how to use technology. I mean, I don't know what version of the iPhone we're on, but no one has ever, as far as I can tell, taken an iPhone class on how to use an iPhone or an Android phone. So as individuals, we're very adaptable and very adept at using new technology. It's the institutional settings, the corporate settings, the organizational settings, and certainly the government settings, which is another conversation, that take time to catch up. But in the last few years, we've been in that first phase of adoption, which is, let's figure out what this stuff is and what it can do. That's involved a lot of companies and a lot of us as individuals being trained or training ourselves on what do all these terms in AI mean. And I think that's been extremely helpful. We've done a lot of experimentation, a lot probably more personally than we've done in our professional lives, right? Because it's been very easy to access these technologies. And many of us are, I was going to say the younger you are, maybe the more you experiment, but you know, I'm not particularly young, but I do a lot of experimentation as well. And I think this period of the last 1,000 days from November 2022 to early 2026 we've laid a very important critical foundation. As employees, as workers, as individuals, we're getting comfortable using AI tools, and we're getting comfortable using them a lot. And they're on our phones, they're on our computer screens, they're on our tablets. That's great. And we've seen, I think, some very interesting and positive progress within the jobs that we're doing and within the tasks that we're asking AI to help us on. So this first phase, which is let's become comfortable, let's get access to new technologies, whether it's LLMs, whether it's Copilot, whether it's different versions of Claude or OpenAI or Perplexity, whatever it is that you use. And now we're asking the sort of second wave question, which is how do we go from widespread experimentation and adoption and piloting to significant redesign and reimagination? And that's hard for a couple of reasons. One is it challenges the whole frame, as we talked about a minute ago, because, and I'll use a couple of examples here. It's very easy to say we should redesign and reimagine work. I've been looking at this for 15 years. But we are wed mentally to models of the way things work. I'll give a couple of examples. We're wed to the idea of a job. A job for about 150 years has been the major unit of analysis for the way we organize both work and companies. And jobs were very clearly defined. A job was a specific set of tasks, often done in a sequential manner. And then we had specific training and skills where we could go back 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and start training people to come into doing that work, doing those sets of tasks. And that model worked really, really well. But what happens when work and jobs become dynamic? What happens when they start changing very quickly? We had an idea of what a career is. A career was a ladder, right? You get educated, you then get on a corporate ladder, you join finance, you enter as a finance clerk in accounts receivable or accounts payable, and then maybe you do some financial analysis and financial reporting, and maybe you become a controller, and maybe you become a divisional CFO and a CFO. I'm not being critical of these. These ideas, these models are deeply embedded in the way that we think about business. And part of the challenge when we go from the incremental improvements using AI to the redesign opportunities is it allows us to ask a new set of questions. It really reminds me in a way of what we did with business process reengineering in the 1980s. And we began to ask the question, and this was Hammer and Champy when they started talking about this, I'm dating myself, of course, which is if you could redesign processes from scratch on a blank sheet of paper, what steps were necessary and what steps could you do away with because of the technology that we have today?
But you're assuming that piece of work even needs to be there to begin with.
No, I'm not. Absolutely spot on. I think that the question, this is absolutely one of the central questions, which is, are you looking at optimizing process, or are you looking at redesigning and reimagining work to get to a particular outcome, right? And so I don't want to jump around too much, but I'm going to go to another example here. In HR, which is a world that I know pretty well, we are very attached to some standard models of HR operations. A lot of it's based on the old Dave Ulrich's model, which is we have a transaction layer, we have COEs, we have HR business partners, and we've been looking at these processes and these roles for many, many years, and we've been optimizing them, including by adding AI to them. A number of companies in the last few years have raised the question, and this comes to your observation, Stela, about do we need to do the work at all, which is they've come up with this idea of full stack HR. Let's look at everything that HR does, and then let's ask the question, I'll give an example, do we need a separate division for recruitment and talent management and contingent labor management and L&D and performance management? Or is there some new configuration of this, let's call it talent access and growth, that looks at your employees' ecosystem technology as a participant in the workforce, that you could redesign this? And so we can create this full stack HR view of life. But even that, to go back to your observation, assumes that what HR does is what HR does, right? Maybe it's not about what HR does. Maybe it's about what HR and technology and procurement do as it relates to the workforce. So maybe it's beyond full stack. Maybe it's the new stack. Maybe it's the non-stack. I'm trying to be a little provocative here. And that, when we raise these questions, it makes us a little bit nervous. It makes people uncomfortable, but I'll go back to the 2022, 2026, 2030 question. If you were asking in 2026, what transformation initiatives you should be undertaking for 2030, and it is not highly disruptive, you're probably missing the mark, right? Because remember, 4 years ago, we didn't even have generative AI. And if you were to have said 4 years ago, you need to be prepared for a workforce where AI and people are working together in everything that they do, where every worker is working next to and with a smart machine, an AI agent, or a robot. 4 years ago, people would have said, well, that's 20 years in the future, Jeff, Stela, and Donna. We don't need to think about that, right? So how far are we pushing ourselves? And are we thinking about the short and the long term in an integrated way, I think becomes important. So I agree with you. We're moving a little bit from, hopefully we're moving a lot from a process optimization view, way beyond a productivity view, because productivity, and I think this is part of your question, productivity is doing more of the same thing with less human input. But it doesn't raise the question, what's the output? What's the impact? What's the value that we're trying to create? And this is where 2026 in the era of enterprise AI becomes interesting, because we are moving beyond an adoption and a pilot mode. We're moving beyond the 10, 20% improvement. We're asking the question, how might we fundamentally redefine what we're doing? Is it a full stack question? Is it a new stack question? Is it beyond the stack question? And how do we organize ourselves to do that? One other observation as we're moving on. It's extremely helpful that in the last 3 years, we've been going through this adoption and AI education and AI experimentation phase, because increasingly many of our employees and managers are familiar with these tools. They're familiar with their power, right? And now we get to the point, and there was a great piece from, hopefully I'll get his name right, Doug McMillan was the CEO of Walmart, who said something like, look, I can't imagine a job in retail that's not going to be impacted by AI. But it's our job and our responsibility, I think this is the way he put it, as leaders, to help our employees move from the old ways of working to the new jobs and the new ways of working. And I think that's sort of one of the big challenges. Let me add 2 other data points, and maybe this is too much. I'm very fortunate in the work that I do, both at Columbia and Gloat. I get to spend a lot of time reading and doing research. Deloitte recently published their 2026 report on enterprise AI. Many, many great observations, but here are 2 that really caught my eye that are relevant to today's discussion. 84% of the people that responded to this global survey said that they had not started thinking about how to redesign work with AI. Haven't even started. So that's the opportunity in 2026 and 27. Now we get to redesign work with people and AI. Another data point that caught my eye, which is so interesting given how much time I've spent with both HR and people leaders and C-suite leaders, is that one of the biggest challenges as we're moving forward with human machine strategies are the problems and investments that we need to make in people and talent. So interestingly, and again, we talked a few minutes ago, is this human-led or is it AI-led? And some people say, oh, well, it's all human-led. And yet what we're beginning to see in 2026 and 27 is the opportunity and the need and the return on investing and focusing on the development of our employees and our teams and our managers working with AI is an area where we probably need to spend much more effort and be doing some more innovative things and be trying out some new things as well. So we're just beginning the AI job redesign piece. And what we're recognizing, but we always knew this, is that rolling out the technology, getting access to these models is the easy part. Yes, it's expensive, right? I'm not saying it's not. But the challenging part, where so much of the value will be created, will be in the work redesign, the team redesign, and the reskilling and the upskilling of our employees and our managers.
I think that actually moves us into a bit of the next question, because I want to revisit, and phenomenal points. My mind is like going in 10 different places at once, Jeff, in a good way. But you wrote into 2021, Work Disrupted, and it really helped leaders reframe work in a post-pandemic world. But now that we're getting, as you call it, the middle of the beginning of the AI era, what are some new questions that leaders should be asking themselves? But I'm going to build on that a little. If you were to rewrite Work Disrupted today, what would you add, update, or maybe warn leaders about?
Yeah. So these are, what's the word? The economist, these are crunchy questions. These are questions that you can really sink your teeth into. So thank you, Donna. Thank you, and Stela, for that. I recently gave a lecture to a global company that was doing a sort of strategic review, and they brought their executives, or an Israeli-based company, here to New York. And I gave a talk called Beyond Work Disrupted. So the book I wrote in 2021 is titled Work Disrupted. And basically it talks about 5 shifts in workforces, and workplaces. Number 1, how humans and machines are working together, which in 2020 was like, oh, way in the future. And then of course, boom, it was everything. There was the second question was about the changing nature of careers and the changing nature of skilling. So going from career ladders to career portfolios, life portfolios. The third question in Work Disrupted looked at how we were using market mechanisms and ecosystems as ways of deploying talent. So it wasn't an administrative model, which is HR tells people what to do and where to go, but talent marketplaces, talent ecosystems, and workforce ecosystems. And then, of course, the fourth question was what happened to the workplace, how we began to separate the physical work from the workplace itself, and the whole debate about hybrid and remote and distributed work. And then the fifth question was, what does this mean for strategy and leadership and management? So that's what we were looking at. I literally was reading my book, it's always fun to reread your book, before I gave that talk a few weeks ago. It's totally relevant. I mean, it is a very good read today. Hopefully people will pick it up and read it. But we are also at a period where there are some challenges beyond Work Disrupted. So in addition to these 5 challenges, what else do we need to be thinking about? And we've been talking about them obviously a bit today. One, and many of them have to do with human machine collaboration, right? The AI technology frontier has been much more jagged. That's a term from BCG and colleagues at Harvard, but also much more dynamic than we expected. What I simply mean by that is what machines can do is fascinating to us. Machines can do, and when I say machines, I mean algorithms as well, and large language models. They can do things that we didn't expect that they could ever do. And their ability to do new things is increasing very fast. Hence 21 models in 4 years. Each model introduces a new capability. We go, from reasoning to deep reasoning, right? We add memory to what the models can do. We add context and data to what the models have. So what was a jagged frontier, which was very uneven in terms of what technology can do, that is expanding continually. And so that means that we need to have a dynamic view of orchestration, as the two of you call it. What can tech do and what can human technology do is constantly changing. That's a really interesting challenge for us. The second is we are all, and I mentioned this a minute ago, we are all working on cybernetic teams. That's also a BCG Harvard phrase. We're all working on teams where people and technology are working together. We are using technology as tools. We're using technology as assistants. We are working with technology as colleagues, and we are working with technology as a manager. The simple example is you call an Uber or a Lyft or a Get car in Tel Aviv, and you don't call a dispatcher who calls a driver and tells her or him where to go. The algorithm is managing the employees. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but all these 4 things are happening today. We're all on these cybernetic teams. Then the 2 other things that I'll add to sort of the beyond Work Disrupted frame is Microsoft's work last year on the frontier firm, introducing the idea, again, we don't have to agree with it, but the idea of a frontier firm, the idea of firms built around intelligence on tap, the 3 phases that they talk about, humans working with technology as an assistant, humans and technology working on an integrated team, and humans leading teams where the work is primarily done by agents or robots, and the human is primarily in a supervisory and a coordination role. We're all trying to figure out what that means. And then I'll end with this idea when we ask about beyond Work Disrupted. And this is an idea that I talked about in my book in 2021. And it's a concept from Eric Topol, who's a medical doctor. Eric wrote a book called Deep Medicine. He also wrote a book called Super Agers. And in his book, it's got a chapter. I assigned it at my Columbia class, chapter 6, Doctors and Patterns. And he talks about the role of AI in radiology. And one of the apocryphal observations that we've seen. So Geoffrey Hinton, who invented neural networks, won the Nobel Prize for it, I think a year or two ago. Geoffrey Hinton said in 2016, and you can look this up, we don't need radiologists anymore because AI can read digital scans better than almost any radiologist. He updated his view in 2025, and he said, maybe I was wrong, maybe I misunderstood the work of radiologists. And what Eric Topol asks is, what is the work of a 21st century Renaissance radiologist? What is the work of a radiologist when he or she or they get to work with and next to and empowered by AI? So you have some people 10 years ago, Geoffrey Hinton saying, I don't know if I'd encourage my son or daughter to become a radiologist, but lo and behold, there was an article in the New York Times earlier this last fall that said, gee, we talked to the radiology department at the Mayo Clinic, which is one of the premier hospitals in the world. And there are many more radiologists working there than there were in 2021 and 2016. And every one of them is working with AI. And we've invented new fields like I'm going to get it wrong, intervention radiology, where we're using radiology as part of the therapeutic process. What happens when, and this goes to your question earlier, Stela, when we free up time of radiologists? What happens to that time? Well, what we're seeing is they're spending more time with patients. That's a good thing. I don't know your experience. I never get to spend enough time with a doctor or a physician's assistant or a nurse. They're spending more time with the patient's family. They're spending more time with other clinical staff, developing strategies and care plans for patients. And they're spending more time doing things that they couldn't do before. And they're almost all these human things that we'd like and they'd like to spend more time on. So one of the ways that I think about this, if this is, as we're thinking about the enterprise AI era, is one of the opportunities in enterprise AI is to ask the question, what is the 21st century Renaissance version of the work that we are doing? How do we do that work? Obviously, we want to do it more efficiently, more productively, but we also want to create new services, interventional radiology. We want to create more meaning and impact, spend more time with our colleagues developing new clinical approaches, more time with families, more time with hospital administrators. It's this kind of value that we're trying to create. These are all part of, Donna, this goes back to the question, what's beyond work disrupted? I think we have work disrupted questions, but now in this AI era, those questions are being sort of broadened, deepened, and accelerated in many ways.
So, wow, that was quite a comprehensive, multi-dimensional answer. So I appreciate that. If we think about the Renaissance HR job, how might we need to reimagine the pillars of HR in general, what we manage from talent acquisition, performance management, leadership development, organizational design, all of those things have to be reimagined for this new era. What are some of the areas we should prioritize because they will be relatively easier, hopefully, to transition to this new orchestrated human machine collaboration, and which one will have the biggest impact on the speed at which we transition to that future that you're describing?
Again, you're very good at asking 3 or 4 questions in a gulp, and I will try to cover them, but I'll start in this way. I think the first opportunity that we have in HR, which is the opportunity we have in every business area and every business function, is, as you suggested in an earlier question, is to think about outputs and results even before we get to optimizing processes. And so I think one of my suggestions for HR, but this is my suggestion for every business area, is to put some of your investment into the incremental changes. How can we improve talent acquisition with AI? How can we improve learning and development with AI? How can we improve talent mobility with AI? We've been doing this for a few years. I think that's a very fruitful area to look at. But I think the other side of this is, what does HR look like in 2030? And one of the ways that I asked this question, this is the second book that I wrote, came out 3 years ago with colleagues at MIT and Deloitte, which is on workforce ecosystems. And we started with the question, Stela and Donna, when I say workforce, what do you think about? Who do you think about? So we literally asked hundreds of executives this question from everywhere, including NASA, which had a very interesting answer. And they said, well, I guess it's our employees. And then they said, this is an interesting question. It's not just our employees, it's our contractors, and it's our complementators, the people that build apps for us in our app store. And it's our market sellers when we talk to Amazon and we talk to NASA, and they didn't even blink. And they said, oh, it's our robots and our algorithms, and it's the Mars rover and, Curiosity, whatever, all those machines that are running around on these other planets. They're part of our workforce as well. And what we began to see, and this is 4 or 5 years ago, is that the workforce is obviously our employees, but it's also all the human contractual forms that we have, everything from contractors to freelancers to market-based competitions that we can use in order to build new products and new solutions. But it's also the technology that we have, whether it's robots or artificial intelligence in different forms. So one of the challenges that I would put to HR leaders is to ask the question, is HR the right frame? If what we're doing as HR leaders is we are helping the business functions and the business enterprise divisions to get the people and the resources they need, whether they are employees or contractors or machines, how can we become really great experts at workforce composition, recognizing that the workforce is both people with different contractual forms and also technology. And hence, that's why we're seeing Tracy Franklin at Moderna in a role where they've combined HR and IT. I'm not saying everybody should do that. I think Josh Bersin has given his own warning about maybe that's not the right thing to do. But I think that's an interesting indication of if we are going to do more than incrementally improve HR processes with AI, that we think about what's in scope for the workforce. So part of it is workforce composition, which is employees, ecosystemic workers, and technology. And then the other part, of course, is work design itself, right? What does it mean for HR to become work architects and work designers? And then the third piece is, what does it mean to nurture the people with all the different contractual forms that we have, right? Because if I am thinking about the human workforce, I have an employee brand, but I also have a contractor brand. I also have a freelancer brand. And how valuable is it? And how do I actually manage these brands that go with different relationships, recognizing that many of our employees go from contractor to employee to alumni to consultant to other pieces. And I would expect that we're going to see more of that. So part of what I'm describing in terms of answering the question about where HR should focus, yes, of course, focus on the front burner issues, which are how do we apply AI to our current processes and our current model, but also make a significant investment in what the new workforce models look like. And those are really going to push boundaries. Those are going to really, I think, help us move working across silos. And so much of the opportunity with AI and intelligence on tap, as Microsoft describes it, allows us to do some of those things. So we can go narrow or we can go broad. I'm not suggesting that we boil the ocean. Obviously, that would be a mistake and a problem. But if we're talking about 2030, which is another couple of thousand days that we have to go, right? Open the aperture enough so that you can really create the containers of the future, which is what Rashad Tabakawala would encourage us to think about. Or as I would describe it, what are the new maps? So if HR thinks about outputs and results and the future workforce of people, contractors, and technology, and how work is going to be redesigned, that's where the change is. Final observation on this. It's not just HR, it's also management. When I say management, the idea that the image that comes up in most of our minds is, I see somebody with a clipboard and a visor checking people's attendance and making sure that everything's been done, and we're supervising the work. And I think part of what I've been thinking about as we looked at work disrupted and now beyond work disrupted is what are the new, not just employee and workforce models, but what are the new management requirements? What does it mean for managers to go from being supervisors to designers, from being evaluators to coaches, right? From being compliance managers to behavioral economists and designing environments that people can thrive in. So these are examples. I mean, one of the things we're thinking about now, we certainly think about it in business schools, is what are the disciplines and the ways of thinking that will really help us to do things like designing, like coaching, like creating, becoming, the expression I use is Sherpas. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal right out of the university. And Sherpas are the people that live on the mountains. They're the people that really guide people. Part of what we need now are Sherpas, people who are really deep into work disrupted and beyond work disrupted, which is why your podcast and the work you're doing is so important, because hopefully we're meeting Sherpas and we're sharing stories, because we're all out there on these mountains trying to figure out what's going on, and we can share it with other Sherpas, but also share it with other leaders who are trying to lead their own teams up the mountains.
I love that. Oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to dive into. I feel like this could be 3 hours long. Keep going, Jeff.
We'll do a part 2 and later on.
Exactly. We're going to have to do a part 2. We have 2, if it's okay, 2 rapid fire questions to wind us down before we already start thinking about part 2, which I'm already excited for. I have one question. Stella has one. Mine is, if you had to bet on one under-discussed trend that will define the future of work that people aren't really thinking about, what would it be?
What are we not thinking about that we need to be thinking more about?
Or just like a trend that you think maybe a few organizations are doing that others need to think about. Could be another reframe.
Well, I think it's a good way of reflecting on our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
One is really following the trend of what's happening to the workforce. We are used to dividing the workforce into 2 or 3 or 4 categories. Employees are over here with HR, technology agents are over here with IT, contractors are over here with procurement. I think the trend of going towards workforce ecosystems, people and technology working together, both in terms of workforce composition and in terms of management, I think is absolutely critical. And my bet, and we can review this in 2030, is that we will be in a world of ecosystems by that point. The other is the statistic that I mentioned earlier that was in this Deloitte report that said 84% of companies report that they haven't started or they're just beginning to think about work redesign. We have an opportunity to really move from this adoption phase to this redesign reimagination phase. The first phase has really been bottoms up. And I think that's going pretty well. I mean, we can argue about it, but people are getting comfortable with the tools. They recognize what they can do. We're using them in our own lives more and more. So I think that first phase is going well. I think the trend that we need to make more progress on and maybe double or triple down on is this redesign and reimagination piece. And that will be done by squads and teams a little bit more in a top-down way than the bottoms-up work that we've done before. But I think that's where a lot of the really exciting work is going to be done. And then it goes to this idea, which is, are we optimizing processes? Are we creating full stack HR? Are we creating new HR, sort of beyond stack HR, which obviously in our discussion would be a way of combining the workforce challenges from the employee side, the contractor side, and technology side. Technology is part of the workforce. So those are things that I think people can go faster on and put a little bit more weight on the scale on that.
What keeps you up at night personally? What are you worried about this future emerging?
Like question.
What keeps us all up at night? I have 3 concerns. And this is interestingly how I ended Work Disrupted. It's also in a way how we ended the Workforce Ecosystems book, which is we asked, what does the future mean for 3 personas? What does it mean for us as individuals? Right. And by individuals, I mean me. I'm in my 60s. My daughters, my wife and I have 4 daughters. They're in their 30s. Kids who are in their 5, 10, 15, and then people who are in their 70s and 80s, all throughout our lives. What does this mean for individuals? How are we going to adapt? What does it mean for learning? What does it mean for careers? There's a lot of reshaping that needs to go on for us as individuals. I worry that we are frozen in mental models that may not be really helpful for us. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I would say that I'm worried. What keeps me up, Stella and Donna, I'm worried that this is such a big challenge for corporate leaders. We may not be going fast or hard enough to make the changes that will really create opportunities and value for our companies, our customers, our shareholders, our employees. This is, in a good way, a period of upheaval, but we keep doing this. We did computers and then the internet and then digital. Now it's AI. And we need to find a way to keep going really, really fast. And this shift from supervised to design, from compliance to coaching, these kind of shifts, they worry me. But my biggest worry is how we deal with these issues from a public policy and a governance perspective. These things are moving fast, and we do need regulation. And when I wrote Work Disrupted, I said, we don't need, in addition to safety nets, we need transition nets, which is a concept that came from studying what's going on in Europe. We need to be able to help people make multiple career transitions throughout their lives, right? And not just go to night school, but how do we help them pay their rent, get their health care, contribute to their pensions? If you're going to have 4 or 5 or 6 career shifts in your life, not one or none, then that creates very significant potential opportunities and requirements on public policy. One of the ways I put my worries into categories is I think about, what does this mean for me and us as individuals? What does it mean for us as corporate leaders? And what does it mean for us as citizens and members of societies? And there's a lot of work to be done across the board.
What a lovely framing. I love that. I think the way I would summarize what I've heard is there is an opportunity for HR to be navigators, help the organization navigate this new map, build new containers, create new leadership, enable the new work to be designed properly such that we can create this ecosystem of frontier super teams of humans and machines.
Let me add something. As we're thinking about the future roles of HR, I think one of them really is a navigation role. One of them is as helping us set new direction and then moving. By the way, this is the Sherpa metaphor that we've been talking about as well. And what we've been thinking about at Gloat, our focus for the last 7, 8 years, but even the last couple of years especially, is what we've been trying to do is to develop mechanisms to help individuals and business leaders and team leaders navigate differently. Talent marketplaces enable people to explore opportunities in their own company, to explore careers in their own company. It enables people who are trying to get work done to navigate and find skills and capabilities in the organization. And our focus in the last year, 2 years, has been very much on how do we help HR and IT and business leaders navigate, find where the opportunity is. We talk about our platform now as a companion, as a GPS tool that helps identify where work can be automated, where work can be augmented. How do you redesign the work? How do you change and reskill the workforce so that you can take advantage of that reskilling? It's not just an intelligence focus. Obviously, we want to generate insights. We also want to develop tools that help people actively navigate. So when I use my cell phone to navigate where I'm going, it not only gives me a map, but as I'm progressing, it tells me where I am and what the next step is in the journey.
Here's to the emerging workforce model Sherpa of the future. Thank you, Jeff. This was amazing. Great insights. And I'm sure our audience will learn a lot from this.
Thank you, Stella. Look forward to part 2 sometime in the. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
You've been listening to Workestration, hosted by Donnas, Scarola and Stela Lupushor. Music by Philippe Visitil. Everything else we're doing ourselves because someone has to walk the talk on lean operations. Find show notes at orchestration.ai. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If this episode sparked something, leave a review or share it with someone trying to solve the same problem. Want to be a guest? Book time at orchestration.ai. Thank you for listening.